Hi, and welcome to my first screencast. This screencast is part of my Intro to Swift series from my blog, PeteOnSoftware.com. It's going to cover making our first simple Swift iPhone application. First, we're going to take a look at how to get the project started, and then we're going to make a Hello World application, and finally, we're going to add an interactive feature to the application using the Swift language. To get started, I've got Xcode open here. For this recording, I'm using the latest version available, which is Xcode 6 Beta 4. So to start, we're going to go File, New Project. I'm going to make sure that we're on iOS, Application, and then choose Single View Application, and then click Next. Then we need a product name. For this, I'm just going to use Hello Swift. Since I've run this before, it's remembered previous values that I've entered for both the organization name and the organization identifier. The organization identifier is typically in the form of reverse DNS, and in this case, I used my blog and entered com.PeteOnSoftware. I'm going to make sure that the language drop-down, you've chosen Swift. And devices, we're just going to pick iPhone for this project. We also are going to leave this Use Core Data box unchecked because this is a simple application that will not have a persistence layer. And then we click Next. I'm just going to accept the default location where I've been saving my code already. We're going to ignore the create a Git repository on this project for now because it's simple, and personally I prefer to manage Git from the command line. So we'll just hit create here and we're set to go. Now our project's created. On the left here we have all of the project files. For this project we're only going to be concerned with two of them, and that's the main.storyboard and viewcontroller.swift. In later screencasts we'll have the chance to look more at more of the other files. To get started, let's single click here on the main storyboard file. This brings up the view controller for our single view. You'll notice that in Xcode 6 we don't bother with font size or portrait or landscape by default. Apple's trying to make all designs reactive in nature and have taken auto layout to the next level with adaptive UI in iOS 8. This won't affect us too much here, but we will have to use some constraints even for our simple layout. If we select the emulator to be the iPhone 5S and just run it, you can see we have a blank application. So let's hit the stop button and get to work. First, let's go down to the lower right hand corner and make sure you've selected the third icon, which represents show the object library. And I'm going to give us a little bit more room here as well. Okay, from the object library, let's grab a label and drag it out on the screen. Doesn't matter 100% where we put it. I'm going to just stick it right over here. We're going to change the text on the label. You can either do that by coming up here to this fourth icon, which is the attribute inspector, and changing the label. Change it to something here. Or I can come in here and change it. So I'm going to change this to just say Hello World. And now the box is just about as wide as it needs to be. With it selected, the label selected, I'm going to come down here to this first option, the bottom align, click that. I'm going to choose the box that says horizontal center in container. And then I'm going to click to add a constraint. So now if we run the simulator, we see our text centered on the page. And if I rotate it, you'll notice it stays center the entire times. Okay, but that's kind of boring, and that gives us the core of Hello World, but let's do a little bit more. And to do that, let's add a button under that first label and another label here. The button, I'm going to change the text to say click me. And this label, I'm going to give it a little bit of space, and then I'm just going to actually clear what's inside of it. Don't worry that you don't see it. If you click and drag a horizontal selector, you can pick it back up again. So let's add our constraints. I'm going to click the button, come to the horizontal center, add a constraint, find my label, and add the constraint here as well. Now when I run the app, you see we're centered within the stack. We're still good. Hit stop. All right. Now let's do some actual coding. If I hit Option Command Enter, that's going to bring up our assistant editor. By default, the assistant editor will bring up the code file for the view controller that you're working with in the storyboard or the nib. Since this is the first iOS Swift code that we've seen, let's take a look at it. There isn't much here. We have an auto-generated comment section with file creation stats, our import statement to make UIKit available to us in the code, and then we declare the view controller class, which inherits from UI view controller. And we've overridden two methods, view did load and did receive memory warning. Both of these just call back to the default implementation of the methods. If you wanted to do something right after the view loaded up, you would do it in view did load right after this helpful comment, for instance. If you want to control what happens in your app when the user's device runs low on memory, you may clean up any variables, in-memory caches, etc., or risk iOS just reclaiming whatever it wants. You would do that here. For our purposes, we're just going to use the power and simplicity of the assistant editor to wire up the button and the label that we've added. First, the label. So we're going to take this label, hold down Control, click it, and drag over to the right above the view did load function. A small modal is going to appear here. You choose an outlet of type connection. Choose outlet over here in the connection box, I mean. The object is view controller, the name. I'm going to call it display label. The type is UI label and the storage is weak. And we'll hit connect. We then get a line of code. The @IB outlet is just a clue for the tooling to know that this variable is available to be matched up to a graphical object. It has a weak reference, and then we get to our var keyword to declare a variable, the name for the variable, display label, and then the type, UI label. This exclamation point at the end is something new in Swift. It's similar to the question mark, which means that the variable is basically a nullable type. But with the question mark, you have to unwrap the variable in order to use it. When you're using an exclamation mark, you're declaring it to be an implicitly unwrapped optional, meaning that you don't have to unwrap it to access the value, but that it can still be nil. All right, so let's wire up our button now. Again, I'm going to hold down Control, click the button, and go over here. And this time I'm going to put it right below did receive memory warning. In this modal, the connection, again, action was in here, but I'm going to take, outlet's in here. I'm going to take action. I'm going to name it button was clicked. The type, I don't want it to be any object. I do want it to be the UI button. The event is going to be touch up inside, which is the iOS convention for responding to a touch event. And then we're going to pass the sender as an argument to allow us to know which button actually raised the action. Hit connect. All right, so here's this function. One more thing that I want to do is I want to set up a class level variable to keep track of a counter. So I'm going to just call that var counter :int equals 0 to initialize it. And then we're all set. So the first thing I want to do here in button was clicked is increment that counter ++. And now I'm going to set our display label .text equal to the button was clicked, and then I'm going to use the string interpolation that we've looked at in previous tutorial. And that's all there is to that. So now every time the button's clicked, this method will get called, the counter will get incremented, and the text will read the button was clicked, whatever variables in the variable, whatever values are in the variable number of times. So let's run this. So we've got hello world and click me. I click. As you can see, it is incrementing the counter. That's all there is to it. All right, that's the end of this tutorial. We created a Swift iOS project, set up a simple UI, and then added a little bit of dynamic functionality to the UI using the Swift language. In the next tutorial in the series, we're going to make a more complicated Swift iOS application. We're going to consume a REST API, display the results, and then interact with those results. You can always follow along with the Intro to Swift series on my blog, peteonsoftware.com. I'll have a link in the description to point you to the exact section of my blog. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.